Alright guys, so we're looking at Deuteronomy 30 again today. A couple of the things. We kind of left off on verse 2 or 3 maybe, and I wanted to continue on with a couple things. So basically he says in the first couple verses and then the end of 29 that they're not yet in the land, but he's going to bring them into the land. He knows they're going to depart. And when they do, basically their job is to go, and they're going to be scattered around to other nations. They're going to make an impact on these other nations, and then as a result, once these other nations start paying attention to them, then God is going to bring them back in the land, and in doing so, he's going to reveal himself and his love through the Israelites. So and this is something that we see in Hosea as well, because Hosea talks about him basically making them a people who were not his people, and he talks about basically the word going out to the Gentiles and things like that, and then he's going to call them in. So we can see that from there as well, and you can look at Romans 9, it talks about that as well. So one of the things that I wanted to kind of look at today is, all the things that the Lord says that he will do. Somebody made a comment yesterday about the regathering in 1948, and I do believe that is a biblically fulfilled prophecy. However, I don't think that's what this particular chapter is talking about, and I'll explain why in a second. Starting in verse 3, it says that the Lord thy God will turn thy captivity. So he's talking about the fact that they're in captivity, and that the Lord thy God is going to turn thy captivity and will have compassion on thee, and will return and gather thee from all the nations whither the Lord thy God has scattered thee. So it was the Lord thy God that scattered him. If any of thine be driven out to the outmost parts of heaven, from thence the Lord thy God will gather thee, and from thence he will fetch thee. So he tells them, it doesn't matter how far out you end up getting scattered, it's the Lord thy God that's going to gather you, and he will fetch you from those places. And the Lord thy God will bring thee into the land which thy fathers possessed, and thou shalt possess it, and he will do thee good and multiply thee above thy fathers. So everything is good here, nothing really definitive, but the Lord is saying that he's going to bring him in and that he's going to multiply him. And then this is the reason why I don't think that this is the 1948 gathering, because in verse 6 it says, and the Lord thy God will circumcise thine heart and the heart of thy seed, to love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and with all thy soul, that thou mayest live. So he tells them right here that basically when this whole sequence of events happens, he's going to gather them in, he's going to multiply them, he's going to bless them, he's going to bring them in from all these different areas, but he's going to circumcise their heart, and not just their hearts, but the heart of their seed as well, talking about their children. And we know that when we look at like Romans 2:24, I think it's 2:20, it's the last verse in chapter 2, I think it's 24 or 27, something like that. We know that circumcision of the heart is talked about in the New Testament as well, and it's talking about essentially what Jesus was talking about, that that rebirth, that state where we become born again and our hearts are turned wholly towards God. And we know that this is not the case of Israel right now. Most people who have been to Israel, know that by and large the land, there's a lot of people who are still following kind of Old Testament traditions. I once worked with a guy who was a Hasidic Jew, and he followed all of these ritual practices, Shabbat, things like that. But the guy was an atheist. He, or probably more accurately, he was agnostic, but he was doing it because it was part of his culture. He wasn't doing it because he had any sort of relationship towards God. And this is kind of a theme that goes across a lot of Israel is, even though those people are still to this day, a lot of them are still keeping the law. They're not doing it because their heart is turned towards God. They're doing it just because it's how they were raised. So I think in verse 6 here, that's an indication that this is talking about a future event still. It's not talking about right now. And then he goes on in verse 7 and says, "And the Lord thy God will put all these curses upon thine enemies, and on them that hate thee, which persecuted thee, and thou shalt return and obey the voice of the Lord, and do all of his commandments which I command thee this day. And the Lord thy God will make thee plenteous in every work of thine hand, and in the fruit of thy body, and in the fruit of thy cattle, and the fruit of thy land, for good. For the Lord will again rejoice over thee as good as he rejoiced over thy fathers." So he's talking about basically taking these people, regathering them, turning their hearts towards him, and he reestablishes this relationship, and in doing so he blesses them. And again, let's remember what the purpose of all this is. The purpose of all this goes back to verse 1, where he says that I'm going to do all of these things after you've been scattered into these nations and stuff. I'm going to do all these things, and I'm going to bless you and multiply you, and I'm going to do everything that I promised, and I'm going to turn your hearts towards me, because you are going to be my representative. You are going to be my miracle. You are going to be the outlet through which I let the world know that you're my people, and who I am. People often complain that if God is real, why doesn't he reveal himself? Well, he has many times in the past, and he's going to do here in this future event, such that no one is going to be able to deny. So I do think that this is future. If you disagree, go ahead and comment. Let me know why. The circumcised heart thing is something that I'm kind of hung up on, because I don't see that as taking place amongst the Jews, unless this is talking about possibly, the grafted in Gentiles as well. So let me know your thoughts on that. Anyway, God bless.